Dr. Zakaria Djebbara. Welcome to the Neuroarchitect.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Please tell us more about your professional journey and the motivations behind your focus on bridging architecture and cognitive neuroscience.
Yeah, sure. So I guess my journey, I take that as a question about my career, just to be sure, right? Like how I came into this field and how these questions came about.
Yes, like how did you start thinking about how architecture, can be connected to neuroscience? How did you start to do your research, to search about it? If there were people who helped you or found it strange, your challenges and obstacles.
Yeah, sure. So there's a few things that are important, I think, to mention that really led me onto this path. The first one being that as a person who is very, let's say, occupied with architecture during my youth, especially when I was, taking the education to be an architect here in Denmark. Um, the catch here is that in Denmark there are several kinds of architects you can become. There are the traditional architects you become at the School of Architecture, and then there are the architects um, that you can that is basically based at the university where you become an engineer instead. So it's more like a civil engineering education. And the
You mean that
interest.
there is architectural design and architectural engineering,
Um,
or
I guess it fits under architectural engineering. I think so. Actually, I'm not sure if that's really because the official title is still Candidatus Polytechnicus, which is a civil engineering title more than it is an architectural engineer per se. Um, so it's basically an architect, but you know how to build stuff. Like you literally know what is in the wall, and you know how to talk about structures. You know how to compute ventilation systems. You know a lot about heat transmission. So and you know how to energy optimize a house or a building in general. And you learn a lot about it's more engineering, right? So you learn the language of.
it's architectural engineering. I mean, this is
Yes.
something I took, like these courses. I took them, for example, in my study.
All right. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. So the thing about that is you get very technical quite fast, right? And you sort of lose a little bit of the softer part of architecture. And this softer part I learned comes best through experience. And as a person who traveled quite a lot to Algeria, is where I come from originally, I thought I knew a lot about, you know, the the difference between cultures. Traveling between North Africa and Europe, you think that you know what it means to operate between cultures. But then uh, we traveled to Japan as part of a study trip. So in Denmark, every year we go on a study trip, and I think it was on my the last year of my bachelor's. We went to Japan for a month, uh, and then I was really shocked. I remember that was something that wow, okay, people really do it differently. When I say do it, I mean everything, literally everything. Just the whole thing from the moment you wake up um, to you go to sleep, you do things everything differently. So the way they dress, the way they literally decorate the interior, the way they eat in the morning, the way they greet each other, the way they talk to each other, all of these things, they are so different. And you can feel that there is a tight relationship between that and their environment. And I remember that that was the first time I started really questioning what is the importance of the built environment. And I came back and I was completely, baffled. Like I was like, wow, this is insane. And I don't think that we really understand architecture. I don't really think that we understand its effect on the human beings. And when I came back, I realized that during the few years I studied architecture, there was no, proper education on the human aspect of it. Like, I can calculate the direction of forces and tell you a lot about momentum and beams and columns, but I can tell you very little about the human effect, like psychological effect. The
And
different
which
space.
year was that? Which year
I
was
was
that?
so I traveled between my third and fourth year.
Which year? 2000.
Oh, so that was back in 2013, 14,
Okay.
somewhere around there. And I was very lucky because the moment I came back, one of the pioneers of architecture and neuroscience was recently hired at our university and was teaching. He did the very first stress experiment with systematic variation of architecture, and
Who did that?
that's Lars Brorson-Fink. And
Okay.
he wrote this huge report that he was commissioned by it. He was commissioned to do this by a large company. No, not even a company. It's more like a foundation, really. With a big group of other architects, and they wanted to figure out when you create hospitals, what features of the hospital can contribute to the healing process. Um, and so they started looking into the literature, and it's quite funny, right? Because in their literature review, they show that if you really follow the philosophy of science, there are no good studies out there. Um, you know, where you have a deductive approach, you establish a hypothesis before you start, and you have a very tight systematic variation of the architecture. These, I would say, more or less standard expectations to your scientific design, your experimental design in psychology. There were actually no good studies of architecture at that time. And so he embarked on his PhD and he defended it in 2014. And as you can see, it's just about the same time that I started getting interested in this. And I remember coming back and he gave this fantastic lecture about dualism. The fact that you have this, that there is a Western understanding of the body and the mind as being distinct. So your experiences and who you are and your personality and all of these qualitative layers are distinct from the quantitative layers that are your body, your heart, these quantitative things that exist in space. Um, and he made the argument that there is no such distinction. It's more or less everything is the same. Your experience is reflected in your bodily processes and your mechanisms of not only your brain, but also quite literally your guts and your heart and your lungs and so on and so forth. And most importantly, through your movement. So when I came back, I was completely baffled by this. This was the first lecture we had on how human beings are being affected by the architecture. And he did this fantastic study on cortisol levels, like he would take saliva tests from people every 10 minutes as they were being stressed psychosocially. So he would use this.
Facing some, they were facing some facades, or like they were in a certain built environment when he was taking when he was taking the samples of cortisol.
I guess we could go into the details of that as well. That could be quite interesting. No facades. No, actually. So what he did was he based it on a traditional stress test. The one that is called TSST. It's very standard in psychology. It's called Trier Social Stress Test. The idea is that since nobody can agree on what stress is, then there are several definitions. An important one is the social stress. And here you would say that there are mainly two ways that you can stress people. You can either put them through pain, do something painful to them, or you can question their position in the social hierarchy. That really stresses people a lot. And the TSST is basically an experiment where there are three judges that are looking at you, and you're asked to do a couple of tasks. One of them being that you have to prepare for your dream job, right? You have to prepare speech where you have to sell yourself for your dream job. Can be an astronaut, can be, I don't know, whatever, right? Uh, you just have to sell yourself for the next 5 minutes. And the judges are trained, like trained actors. They're trained to tell you that, oh, you're not really that good. It's not really impressive what you have done. And they really, question you quite a lot. And this makes people super, super nervous and anxious. And then as an additional task is that they have to count backwards from 1,687 in steps of 13. And no one can do this without mistakes. And the moment you make a mistake, they tell you, that's wrong. You have to start over. Now, Lars was very smart because these kinds of tests were usually being used to understand the person that is being tested, right? So the stress levels of this person. Is this a person who gets highly anxious, or are there some other, uh, disorders involved in this person? And this is usually what you would do the TSST for. Last, he was smart. What he did, he took healthy people where he expected them to not have these, um, disorders. And instead, what he did is that he put a group of people through that test in a space that has no windows. There is nothing in there, completely closed. And then he had another group where you could look out into the horizon. And he found out that if you take cortisol samples every 10 minutes from these people, you will find that the cortisol levels peak much higher when there are no windows compared to when there are windows. This was basically the first systematic investigation of architecture on stress and the fight or flight mechanism in the human brain. So this was to me, at that time, super exciting, right? I mean, like, this is awesome. We're measuring the body. We're doing a very systematic, airtight test. Um, but obviously, there are always complications. You learn that throughout the way that there will always be some small mistakes here and there. That's maybe for later. I can say more about that. But at that time, I was really captured by that experiment and also his very philosophical approach, right? Like he was always starting by talking about the relationship between the human experience. I mean, in general, quite literally, how you make sense of the world and what that world looks like contra what your body is doing, right? So there's always this quantitative, qualitative aspect that I don't think he bought into at that time, at least. I think he saw it much more continuous, the whole thing. And it's quite funny because maybe I'm jumping maybe too fast here, but today we have a group together, and he's a member of that group as well. So I guess somehow we succeeded in many ways. He succeeded in capturing my attention for long enough.
So, in simple words, for the audience, what do you do and how do you contribute to architecture and people's well-being?
That's a great question. Maybe I can continue from where I left off. I think that's a nice continuation because it's going to answer that question as well.
Okay.
So after the lecture of last, I started thinking, should I go to industry or should I just stay in research? Because I am very nerdy. I'm very inclined towards philosophy, psychology, and physics, mathematics as well. And at that time, I was very, confused, and I thought, you know what, I'm not instead of going to industry, I'm going to do 6 months with Lars. And I did. And during those 6 months, he immediately introduced me to a large group of people, neuropsychologists, psychologists, and so on and so forth. And I was immediately, taken in by the community. And I started doing my first, theoretical work on neuropsychology and architecture. And at that time, it was all about synesthesia. The phenomenon where you have one sensory modality influencing other sensory modalities to the extent that we don't really know whether that is a top-down or a bottom-up influence. And I thought that this is an amazing phenomenon. And I thought maybe architecture is actually doing something like that when we move through spaces. So I actually ended up working with him for 6 months, and then I wrapped up my master thesis in that theme as well. And immediately after, Lars thought that this was such a good project, and he offered me to work with him after my graduation, and I did. And it took me after 2 or 3 months, I was offered a PhD to really take this further, and I grabbed it and I said, you know what, I'm going to do this at least for 3 years, and then we're going to see where it takes me. Um, I was very naive at that time. I was like, this is super cool. I'm just going to do this to learn more. And then after that, I'm going to go into industry and see how I can contribute. Um, Eventually what happened was that during my PhD, I got super fast locked into signal processing, electrophysiology, and how you literally analyze data that comes from the heart, the brain, and so on and so forth. And I was very lucky to have met people like Professor Klaus Kramann very early on, who has this very, I don't know, like positive sense around him. He's so, optimistic, and he can see, like I told him, look, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a neuroscientist. I'm an architect. And he said, doesn't matter if you know how to code in VR and you have a sense of programming, then I'm sure, and also mathematics, that I'm sure that we can teach you the rest. And I went to Berlin for 6 months, and that's when I started really learning a lot, like a lot, a lot. I would say that it was a turning point in my career when I moved to Berlin. When I came back, I brought a lot of competences with me, and I started up a lab in Aalborg with Lars Wolfson. At that time, the content, the theme that we were really interested in was affordances. That is how the space offers you in the possibilities for actions, because that fit quite nicely with what he had done, right? Like he saw that you can reduce the level of cortisol being produced if you have spaces that are open, because you can flee, right? That's the fight or flight mechanism. If it's closed, you can't. You have to fight. If it's open, then you can't fight, and so there was a reduction, the production of cortisol. And so we thought maybe there was something about that. Maybe it is the possibility for action in architecture that is a major component in how we experience it. So I did my first study, and we had some amazing results, and we published it in a very nice journal, and it was well received by many communities. And I think at that point, that's when I realized, but how exactly am I contributing to architecture here? Because my findings were purely in the field of, well, I'm exaggerating here. It's not purely, but it was basically cognitive neuroscience, what I was doing, you know. It was some elegant analysis of the brain, some elegant analysis of the behavior, and it was published also in a very scientific journal. And I was like, how should I translate this to architects, to my friends, to my colleagues, so they understand what is happening here? And then I engage in that whole exercise of how do you translate scientific findings to architecture. And this is still something that I don't think I truly master at all. I think that it's one of the most difficult tasks that exist out there, is how you go from very concrete findings to more generalized implications. Um, so instead, what I did, and this is more recent because this is something I've been thinking about quite a lot only lately. I remember when I defended my PhD was in 2020. At that time, I was just still busy thinking about more experiments. How can I ask more questions? And I was very, that's what occupied me. Now we have started a network together with major Danish architects where we invite them into the lab and we conduct stuff together. So it's no longer, me as an academic and my group. We have a group called the BAR, the Brain Body Architecture Research. I'm the group leader there. We're about 6 people, 5 to 6 people now, and we always have many students coming in and out visiting us from different places, and they bring experiments with them. And as you can see, it's very, academic in the sense that we ask questions that we find interesting. But then once you invite the industry, they start asking questions that they find interesting, and they are radically different from those that we pose, because we don't have to adhere to a project manager or to a budget or to in the same sense as they do. So they are always looking for, smart solutions and stuff like that in another domain than we do. The moment we invited them in, we started having major discussions, beautiful, very progressive debates, because at that time it was like I was learning a lot, and I guess they were learning a lot as well about the limitations of science and the possibilities of science as well. So now we are almost a full year through, and we're developing an experiment, and now there's a quite direct, I would say, direct exchange of knowledge between academia and industry. And I think that, to answer your question, that's how I'm contributing to the industry. And we're also doing stuff now with mental health, but that's still in progress.
What are you implementing, your findings in projects? Are you designing?
Yes, yes, we're all designing together. We're doing all kinds of things together. It's yeah, it's kind of you have to imagine a melange, it's like a
Yeah.
mix. Yeah, it's like a mix of people that are someone like us. My team, we are very nerdy. We like to talk about models, mathematical models. We like to talk about how you can predict something out of other features, and they are more interested in, yeah, but how can I implement this, and what does this mean to my client? What does it mean to my user? What does it mean? And these conversations, I think, are very, very important because they learn from our approach and we learn from their questions as well. So, in that sense, yeah, there is a clear exchange there.
Mm. And your PhD, you took it at the School of Architecture?
No, I took it at the university.
Yes, I mean, Yeah, when we say School of Architecture, I mean faculty at the university or like neuroscience, or so you took it at the architecture.
Oh, no. I took it at the architecture with bridging into cognitive neuroscience under neuropsychology, right? So I had two supervisors. I had a supervisor who was a neuropsychologist, who is a neuropsychologist, and another one who's an architect.
The when you say in your findings and in your professor's finding or your colleagues, you found that um, closed spaces stress people, whereas open spaces, make you less stressed. But isn't like a closed space, uh, doesn't it give you more a sense of security because you're in your shelter?
That's a good question. So the idea of TSST is basically to probe, to push the fight or flight mechanism that we know takes place between. I don't know how to detail. I have to get here, but it's
Just speak,
basically
people who are watching or listening are interested in neuroarchitecture, basically.
right, right.
So,
Okay, so the TSST is basically an experiment that really pushes the fight or flight mechanism. So you have to create a situation in which it's very unpleasant. And we create that unpleasant situation through, testing their position in the social hierarchy. When you do that, we know it's unpleasant. So there is no one who really wants to be there. And you can see that also in the spike of cortisol as you're getting into the actual experiment. So from the very extensive literature that exists on the fight or flight mechanisms from animals and humans, we know that it activates that mechanism that says, should I fight, flight, or freeze? And basically, in the case of when you have everything closed, there is no flight, so nobody can flight. You can't run away, and we know that you want to. So if you give you the option, even though no one did it, they just need the option. You don't have to actually flee. Just having the option, the potential, that is enough to start reducing your cortisol levels. That's the study from 2014.
and what's the difference between having doors? So it's a closed space, but you have doors, or the open space. What's the difference for
That's a
people?
good question. Yeah. So that's the question that I posed in my PhD at that time. So there we had a double-sided question. The first one being that philosophically speaking, if it's one of the major, let's say, components that are doing all the heavy lifting of monism, the fact that there is a relationship between your mind and your body, that is the action perception loop. So what you perceive and how you can act, those two things appear to be, part of the same cycle in such a closed loop that they can actually contribute to your experience while also affecting your physical body. So the idea there is to say that, okay, if action perception are so close to each other, they should reflect the same kind of, activity. So in your brain, there are different, let's just call them centers. There is a part that is very central to your brain that is called the motor cortex. That has to do with movement, so that's the action. And in the back, all the way in the back, you have something called the visual centers, and that has to do with processing of visual information. Now, my hypothesis was if these two things are so closed, are enclosed in a closed system, from a philosophical perspective, then I should be able to show people different kinds of doors, and depending on their possibility of interacting with the doors, to actually pass through it, then that kind of activity should be measurable in the brain over the motor cortex, the motor center, and the visual center. Now it's quite interesting, right? Because that speaks to what does that door mean to you? That's your question. What does it? When is it meaningful? And when it's meaningful, we found out is a very pragmatic question. So the brain is very pragmatic in the sense that it really depends on what you want to do, what you're asked to do. So if you give people a task, you know what they have to do, and therefore also what they want to do. In my experiment was very simple. You move from one space into another space. Then there is a circle that is floating in virtual reality. If you touch it with your controller, it will give you some money. So everybody wants to go and touch the red circle. But to get there, you need to pass through doors. And what I did was I created a very wide door so everyone can pass. Then I created a mid-sized door that is kind of difficult to pass. But then I created a door that was only 20 centimeters wide that no one can pass. So three doors are all there, but only two of them are passable. One of them is not. And what we found to our surprise is that that kind of activity is precisely reflected over both visual cortex and motor cortex. And therefore, we could not falsify the hypothesis that they are distinct processes, the action perception. In fact, we find that it looks very much like they are the same. Uh, so in other words, architecture speaks to a great extent to your action possibilities, how you can interact with it, more than necessarily only visual features. So there is a strong motor component in architecture. And I think that's important for testing architecture. That means that when you test architecture, it's very important that you include motor, like literal movement. If you don't include movement, then what you're really testing is more like a picture, like an image that is purely visual, and you have no interaction possibilities with it. So that was like one of the implications for science. On the other hand, for architecture and industry, it literally means that when you have users who are in wheelchairs and they are looking at stairs, then you have a completely different kind of neural response because they have no option to interact with the stairs, right? So here we are starting to look at mental health through different brain dynamics. How does it affect someone that they cannot interact with their environments when the environment is basically restricting you, saying, no, you cannot pass here. And that was the main findings of that PhD at that time.
When you say also action related process, isn't it at some point related to the nurture process, like what you learn from your society, your community? You learn what to do, you get enough training to react accordingly. So it's not only related to your instinct, but also to learn what to do and to become a habit for you, or not, like to be also not familiar with the situation.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. So this is absolutely not instinctual at all. It is definitely with learned actions. You learn, and I had to learn, for example, when I was in Japan, what doors can look like. They can be quite small, and you sometimes have to crawl a little bit. It's still a door, but I had to learn that that was actually something I can pass. That I learned a new kind of interaction, you can say. Um, so yes, this is definitely something that has to do with, culture and learning and habits for sure.
This is why I always stressed on awareness and also on simulations, especially in places, for example, where places prone to disasters. Um, or, because, for example, earthquakes, maybe wars, or any kind of disaster. If you are trained enough, you can know what to do to protect yourself, and at some point, you can get out of the traumatizing effect of this disaster, and build again your place, and maybe build it also in a way to prevent uh, major damages. So it's all about also training the people and the experts to have this knowledge to help people.
Yeah, I guess you're right. That's not my expertise. I really don't know, but it sounds logical.
Yeah, because I focused a lot on PTSD for like 14 years in my research. That's why I linked this point to what I'm doing.
Oh,
Uh,
that's great.
so tell me about a finding in research that you said, like, wow, really, like, this is what architecture does to people, or something that you found and it was groundbreaking, let's say, or
Yeah,
or you read about someone who did like finding, but maybe in your lab also.
yeah. So I mean, there are as a researcher in the field, um, or let's say as an experimentalist in the field, it can get quite lonely. There are not many people who are doing experiments in architecture. In fact, there are just a handful of studies, and I think it's a bit sad because We are big, it seems like we are a big community, but very few wants to do the hard work of actually doing the experiments and analyzing it and so on and so forth.
Sacrifice, because it needs a lot of time and it needs the funding also,
Yeah,
and it
true.
needs
Yeah,
the connection, of the team, maybe. Even sometimes, okay, if you want to work alone, it's possible, but it needs like sacrifice.
it definitely needs sacrifice, that's for sure. I mean, I have two PhD students in Algeria, and I think I was very humbled by their passion for the field, because they showed me that if you really want to study something, you can do it. You don't have to wait for funds. You can do it without. Obviously, you need the right support from people, and I always support students wherever in the world. In fact, I'm flying out to Japan to bring my personal EEG to a student that I don't professionally work with, but we're just friends, and I want to help. So there's always ways. I'm sure that most people know that, but I think that as a
Actually, we reached a point where we are supporting each other across the countries and continents. We are talking with each other as love, be more collaborative. For example, me in the MENA region, talking with labs in the US, talking with people in Europe. Uh, they are talking to me as well. Yeah, we need each other also,
yeah.
to make these findings even stronger, or even to exchange ideas that could inspire each other for further research.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think uh, that's a great point. In fact, I think what we need is probably more experiments, more than anything, to be honest. But as an experimentalist in the field, it can get quite lonely. I mean, I wouldn't say that there are any, super, let's say, astounding, like super complex or surprising findings per se. But we have made a few surprising things, I think. For example, in our latest study, we um, we found that. So yeah, maybe I should talk about the one with corners. We made a study where we tried to continue our understanding of transitions, and one kind of transition is the door. Another kind is when you turn corners. And corners are omnipresent in architecture. There will always be a situation of corners, but it's quite difficult
And
to
when you speak about corner, when you talk about corner, it's not necessarily, the 90-degree corner. You're talking about any
no,
corner.
that's the point, right? Because you come to the point to realize that corners are extremely difficult to really understand. What constitutes a corner? Corners can be 90 degrees, but they can also be quite soft. They can be hard, they can be soft, they can be what about stairs? Is that a corner that is vertical instead of horizontal? What makes really a corner? So what we did is as you know, experimentalists, we start with something very simple to try to understand how does it affect us. So we had people turn corners in virtual reality to the right and to the left, uh, and they had different degrees. We would have the sharpened 90 degree, we would have a softer 45, and then we would have one that was almost straight. It was only 20 degrees. And you walk from one space into another room, one room to another room. And it's quite interesting, right? Because there we wanted to understand attentional processes, like how does that corner affect your attention? So we equipped people with EEG, they were in VR, and we gave them a very simple task. We had them walk through the corridor, basically, that has a corner. And as they are walking, there are small spheres that pop up right and left, in a very unsystematic way. And your task is as you're walking, if it appears on the right, you click the right button. If it appears on the left, you click the left. Very simple. And the literature shows you that when you are pre-oriented to one direction, then your response times are more accurate and you're more faster. You are faster and more accurate if you're pre-oriented to the direction in which your attention is already. That's a very general rule in attention studies in psychology. So, of course, we hypothesized that if you are turning to the right, then anything that happens on your right visual field is going to be faster accurate, and we will also find stronger neural responses because that's where your attention is directed. And to our surprise, we find that it's exactly the opposite. When you are turning to the right, your attention appears to be faster and more accurate, significantly. I would say very significant and a strong effect towards the left. So to the contralateral, the opposite direction. If I'm turning to the right, my attention appears to be oriented to the left. If I turn to the left, my attention appears to be oriented to the right. Um, and we have hypothesized for why that is. You can read the full paper. It's online. I can send it to you. Um, that was to us very interesting because it opposes the literature. The behavioral results are very strong, so it cannot be a mistake, cannot be random. And also the neural dynamics speak very good to the behavioral findings that we find. So it seems to be very, very solid. And that's the surprising thing for us. We thought that the way we interact with the world is in a certain way, but now we learned through experimentation that it's actually completely different. It's completely opposite to what we thought. So that was to us in the group, in the bar, as we say, in the bar, we were very surprised, and that's why we were very happy to publish this study.
Exactly. This is what I like in research in this field. Like sometimes you put like some hypothesis with some expectations in your mind that it's gonna be, your conclusion is gonna be this way. And suddenly you find like, no, it's different. And it's
Mm.
like really for you, it's like something exciting, like to look at your the results and say, oh, okay, so it's not like what we logically think sometimes
Mm. Yeah,
or expect.
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
any final thoughts or ideas you would like to share with us?
Uh, well, I don't know if maybe I can say quickly a few things about the challenges that we have in the field. Um, that I think maybe if there are some young listeners out there, I could inspire a little bit. Um,
We
so
need.
yeah, so I would say that first of all, I think that what the main challenge that we have right now is that there's a lack of experiments. There's a lack of progress. We are not progressing as fast as we can, given the manpower there is in the community. We are very like a huge community at this point. I see a lot of people who call themselves Neuroarchitect, and I see a lot of people talking about our neuroscience from the studio, but most of these things are not. Uh, it's no longer the research, right? It becomes something that people use to sell their projects and so on and so forth, which is perfectly fine, obviously. But what's there to sell if there is no solid ground to stand on? And that's the solid ground that I'm talking about, that I want to remind people, especially young students. Um, it's important because otherwise there's nothing to stand on. So we need to make sure that there is something. And to do that, we need to have more experiments. We need to ask more questions. We need to dare to dive into the science of stuff and even to the complex details of stuff. Um, I always invite people over and I let them do presentations to the group because I think that just having this conversation to begin with is important. And just not giving up because, oh, it seems so complicated. I mean, it is sure, things are as complicated as you want them to be, but there is support. There are people out there who have the skills to help you answer your question. I'm pretty sure that most people are very open to collaborating and open to doing things together with others. Um, so I hope that this can be like one of the challenges that I'm pointing out here is the lack of experimentation. We need more experiments. I'm hoping that this can inspire future students in architecture.
Dr. Zakaria, thank you so much for this interesting conversation.
Mhm. Thank you so much for having me. It was fun.
And thanks for watching us.